Thank you. This next fireside chat that I have the pleasure of participating in is with an extraordinary Israeli, an extraordinary statesperson, an extraordinary leader, former Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Chief of Staff of the IDF, hero of Entebbe, Ehud Barak. We're going to be talking about many issues, but we want the maximum amount of time in which to have our conversation. So we're going to sit down now and start conversing. Ehud, please. This, in a way, is the easiest of the panels for a moderator to start with, because I'm going to ask you a single question. What's the state of Israel at 75?
Israel is probably the most successful national project of the 20th century. In spite of 7 wars, 2 intifadas, infinite numbers of operations in between, the population grew by a factor of 14, the GDP by a factor of 70. We are now a kind of startup nation, members of the OECD. The shekel, until a few weeks ago, was one of the strongest currencies on earth. We have Nobel laureates in sciences, and we are keep kind of moving forward in spite of all obstacles. Israel is by now the strongest country, 1,000 miles around Jerusalem, from Benghazi in Libya to Tehran, including those 2 capitals. It's stronger not just militarily, but also strategically, with huge technological edge over the neighborhood. We are the strongest economy, not the biggest one, but by far the most vibrant and effective one. And we succeeded to make peace with Egypt, which is the most important Arab country, with Jordan, who has the longest border with us. We started with the Palestinians with only partial achievement, but without the Oslo agreement with the Palestinians, which was mentioned more than once this morning, we could not accomplish the peace with Jordan. We failed with Syria until now, and but those basic elements recently even kind of moved forward by the Abraham Accords. It's probably not accurate to call them a peace agreement. We never had wars with these guys, and I remember still as a Minister of Foreign Affairs some 25 or more years ago, a meeting with all of them in here and in Europe and in Sharm el-Sheikh. And but it's extremely important process, and I hope it will move forward. So basically, this is the good news. Bad news is the Middle East remained a tough neighborhood. Nothing to compare to the Midwest. And it's still a place where there is no mercy for the weak, no second opportunity for those who cannot defend themselves. When I was in uniform, I once used to say Israel is a villa in the jungle. As long as you are inside your villa, you can enjoy the jacuzzi or classical music, whatever you enjoy. Once you step out, you have to be ready to pull the trigger within a split of a second, or you won't survive. So there is, every several years, a new threat emerges, and all the old ones, Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and the terror from inside, from outside, are still alive and kicking. But we managed to go through it. And I think that out of this position of strength, that comes with our being the strongest country around. We can, out of strength and self-confidence, look around and see what could be done. We will come, I believe, later on, even to the Palestinian issues and other, the big elephants, I call them. Probably the biggest one is the Palestinian issue. A second one is the relationship between religion and the state. And the third one is the huge gaps in opportunities and results for young Israelis when they are born. These are three elements we have to face, but unfortunately we have a crisis right now, started just 4 months ago, about 4 months ago, which is the most severe, I believe. It doesn't come from the west from the outside. It comes from within. Very severe one, but once again, I'm very optimistic. We will win it over. I mean the protest. You have it here, Gili Sher. When you described him, you missed 2 points. Number one, 50 years ago, almost, few months here and there, give and take. 50 years ago, he was a part of the group of probably 3 or 4 young officers commanding tanks, each one of them 2 or 3 tanks, that together blocked the spearhead of an Egyptian major offensive at the 8 days of the war, and they destroyed within a very short time the leading Egyptian armor brigade and turned the direction of the whole war to our side. 2 days later or 3 days later, the crossing of the canal started. And very few months ago, Gili is part of the self-nominated steering team for this whole protest, one of the most kind of moving and inspiring phenomena in the history of the country, and the source for my optimism about the future. We have the gravest crisis probably, and I told the people I don't know how long it will take and what's the damage along the way. I told them there will be toil and sweat and tears, I hope no blood, and until now, knock wood, we succeeded not having any drop of blood, but we will win. And I'm confident we will win in this crisis, and that's an add to our kind of inner strength as innately democratic society. So I'm very optimistic about the future. In the Middle East, usually we say that a pessimist is an optimist with experience, but that's not the case of Israel at 75. I won't be there in 75 years, but I'm confident that Israel will be in a better shape, stronger, and I genuinely hope being able to solve the relationship with our neighbors, including of course, the Palestinians, for reasons that I probably will describe later.
So, Ehud, you've talked about the situation, the dramatic events, the last 4 months. We've had much discussion during the course of the day today about what they mean. So I ask you, with your experience, forecast where this goes. What are the options in front of Netanyahu, in front of the cabinet, in front of Israelis? Where are we in October or December?
The short answer is I don't know. The longer start with the confidence, as I mentioned earlier, that we will win. No way that Israel will be turned into a de facto dictatorship. We're not talking about threat of turning into dictatorship, a sort or type of Russia under Putin or Turkey under Erdogan, but Hungary under Orban or Poland under Kaczynski is something that this Monday Knesset resumed its session. Within 6 hours we can turn into a de facto dictatorship. And we deliberately do not use vague terms like illiberal democracy. We don't see a kind of a way to make it non-binary. It's totally binary. Either we are democracy, namely there is at least a judicial branch which is totally independent, or we are de facto democracy. Because as it was mentioned already here, the situation right now in Israel is there are the legislative branch are totally enslaved to the executive one. You cannot pass a law if it doesn't come from the government. Probably as a gesture to the public, they allow individual members of Knesset to raise it. It doesn't matter. No law will be passed unless it comes from the government, and the Knesset is totally paralyzed in terms of overseeing, inspecting, or kind of directing the activities of the executive branch. I want to point to those of you who are not subtly acquainted with the Israeli system. We do not have constitution. We do not have two layers of the parliament or the kind of legislative branch that was selected in different ways. We do not have veto power of the president. We do not have a filibuster. We do not have a states, it's kind of a different set of quite independent entities that has to agree to change any comma in the constitution, which is not yet there. So we have nothing, no checks and balances, nothing except the independence of the Supreme Court. Once this is hurt or is short of perfect, Israel is de facto dictatorship. Because a single party, now led by an individual that doesn't have even any kind of the active democracy within his own party, which could do anything that comes to his mind. They can torture the LGBTQ community. They can discriminate against women. They can decide to cancel the opportunity to vote for parts of the population in order to stay in power forever. They can arrest me or any other Israeli, or Gili or anyone, with no reason and no need to explain to anything. And I have to remind you that we still have the emergency laws of the British Mandate, those that helped them to run an empire of colonies. And on top of it, some emergency laws that came from the COVID. So it's critical. And what's disturbing me when I listen even to our dear president, which is, I'm fully confident he's had only good intentions. Gili was my chief of staff, and President Herzog was our secretary of the government. So we know him very well. He's a good man. But what he describes and what others describe is a kind, without telling it explicitly, there is certain symmetry. There are two views about what's to be done. People want to reform the judicial system, and I should agree, admit in brackets, the judicial system needs reform. After 75 years, every system needs reform. The government needs reform, the military needs reform, the health system needs reform, the education system, every system needs reform. That's not the question. The question is whether it's real reform or not. And the best one to define it was the head of the Supreme Court, which I mentioned earlier, the only protection of democracy. She said, this is not a judicial reform. This is an attempt to crush the independence of the Supreme Court and push Israel out of the family of democratic nations. every word accurate, but painful and cruel, but that's the fact. So you cannot have a real compromise. What it means to compromise, about what you are compromising. It seems to me like the wolf and the lamb negotiate what to have on the dish for dinner, or someone negotiate with the executioner about the length of the rope. It's meaningless to deal with them. Within the last 110 days, Israel suffered something devastating. The economy is the verge of the abyss, and was mentioned here earlier. The reservists who in Israel, unlike here, in Israel, certain operation in between big wars is totally dependent, critically dependent on volunteers. Pilots, volunteers. When you see those flame over some R&D installation north of Damascus, or some convoy coming from Iran through Iraq to Syria to Lebanon, and on the Iraqi-Syrian border, in the last convoy it was the vehicle number 8 was hit and exploded because there was something. This is an operation where the leader at the cockpit of the leading F-35 is probably a reservist that just was called early morning, left his kids on the way to school or his workstation in his office, and went to volunteer. When those volunteers, pilots, cyber warriors, special forces, the equivalent of the NSA, when the volunteers say, we are not going to serve, it sounds quite terrible, but it means that there is no operational possibility or activity that is viable between wars. And that's critical, that even Bibi cannot do anything against it. Now, what they say, basically, they say the following. We have a contract with democratic Israel, upon which we are ready to serve, to risk our life in 10 minutes early notice. We already buried friends. We might be the next one to be buried. But we will serve. We will do it even if we question all the policies of this government, including the policies that led to the order for us to execute this mission. But we don't have and we cannot have any contract with dictator or dictatorship, period. And we are not doing the subtle observation of political science department in a university. We see only one definition. If the government can do whatever it decides to do, that's a de facto dictatorship. We are not ready to serve. So now the reasons under pressure from the ambassador, all the members of the previous panel admitted that basically it's not about reform, it's about saving a certain individual from his trial court case. And you know, we are 9.7 million citizens, most of them do not see it this way. But those who have enough tools to see it through the fog of propaganda and everything cannot deny the fact that they know what is there. So what we really face is an unholy alliance. The man wants to rescue himself somehow from his court case. So he created a coalition of others who have problems with the judicial system. There is Netanyahu is still a defendant. Probably he will end up not guilty. Low probability. In Israel there are no juries, and 97% of criminal court cases ended with a verdict guilty. Sometimes through plea deal, but guilty. So with having, you have 3 of them, you can calculate the chances of ending up with not guilty. So he found someone he already convicted twice not for something that he done in his youth in the yeshiva, but bribery and money laundering, whatever, that he done when he was a minister of interior of the state of Israel. Twice convicted. He wants now to bring him back into the government. In what role? Guess? Minister of Interior. And as a reward for his promises to help the coalition, he gave him also another small ministry, Minister of Health. So here comes the Supreme Court, the only one that can intervene. And they said, oh, Mr. Prime Minister, no way, you have to fire him. There's no way. So he found, no, it's not the proper time to quarrel with the Supreme Court about someone else. So he fired him. But the man still remained member of Knesset and head of a faction which is critical for the coalition. So first of all, the two members of Knesset which were nominated into those two ministries, Minister of Interior, one became Minister of Interior of Israel, the other Minister of Health, they did not dare to cross the doorstep into their ministries. And the guy kept directing the ministry from his private residence. But he is a member of Knesset, so there is a weekly meeting of his faction. So Netanyahu came to sit by him, to signal to the public, his supporters, or probably the other partners of this unholy alliance, that in spite of the need to fire him, he still respects him, he come. And in front of Netanyahu, the guys say, if they mean the Supreme Court, remember, the only protector of democracy. If they will close the door, I will come through the window. If they will block the window, I will explode the hole in the ceiling, meaning defy the Supreme Court and dive into the cabinet room. That things that even a democracy cannot accept. You know, we can accept a lot of flexibility, compromise, whatever you want. We cannot accept a kind of being the target of explicit blackmail by anyone, including our own leadership. There is in political science the term defending democracy. We're exactly in this situation. Democracy should be able to protect itself against those who are using the very tools that it provides and the very freedoms that it bestows upon the public in order to destroy it from within. So this is the difference, this is the asymmetry, the disturbing asymmetry. The regime change, as we call it, is very well planned, everything according to the protocol, and it imposed top-down upon the Knesset and the how it's called, ledger of laws of Israel. Even the opposition is basically paralyzed because everything is done according to the protocol. So that sits Gantz or Lapid or together with Merav Michaeli or whoever, and they can do nothing. At the end of any session, there is this screen where you see two numbers, one bigger than the other. The bigger one won, the smaller one lost, and you have to swallow it and continue. So they draw all their strengths, leverage capacity, and everything from the protest. And the same applies to the Supreme Court. Without the protest, Supreme Court would end up being evaporated the same way that it happened in Hungary or Poland. Why is it? Because even there, the Supreme Court judges of Hungary or Poland were professionals and courageous individuals. But when they are really alone, they look around and they are alone, they couldn't stand the pressures. Kaczynski was very clever, and that's exactly what Netanyahu is trying to do now. Kaczynski met two effective demonstrations somewhere in 2015, so he asked the president to veto some law, and everyone had a sigh of relief. wow, we were saved. The president intervened, and he waited 2 years and identified the right moment and completed the judicial kind of regime change. And we are facing similar possibilities. So basically, we have no choice but to fight. We are determined to fight. The difference is that here it's a regime change imposed top-down, and the other side is innocent citizens that their instincts are telling them that something terrible happens and that it could not be allowed to pass. So they come and wait. It's totally spontaneous. The steering team was clever enough to create just a big tent. Everyone is equal in brainstorming, and everyone chooses what to participate in. One who has a minion, namely 10 people, and the other 10,000 people, they are equal when considering what to do, and everyone chooses what he is ready to do, and the steering team and the active kind of staff that runs can help them in some logistics, to have loudspeaker or buses or whatever. But basically it's there. So we have a fight. There is a pause now. Netanyahu was blocked very effectively by the protest, probably by the feedback from the economy, and by some probably remarks behind closed doors from the American administration. And he now tries to stretch it. And this dialogue at the president place has a risk in it, that Bibi expects that the steam will come out of the boilers of the protest, and they will lose the wind in their sails, and it might be open to reactivating. Now, the point is the following. Why is it so dangerous? Because he remained with a loaded and cocked weapon in his hand aimed at the temple of the democracy. What's the way? They started with 160 different initiatives. Bizarre, I don't want even to count them. And at the center, they took 8 of them and passed them through preliminary and first reading. There is only remain second and third reading, which might be completed within a few hours. And one of them, the one most sensitive, namely about the procedure by which the Supreme Court judges will be nominated, had already been put on the table of the Speaker, which means that it can be completed within hours, next Tuesday or whatever. And to go with this handgun is something that I cannot understand. How people in their good senses agree to sit around the table and call it a negotiation. It's not a negotiation, not in business, not in the real battlefield. I suspect not even in organized crime. You don't come with the physical load and cocked handgun to the place. So I see no way but to demand that all these, first of all, as a precondition for any serious negotiation of the needed reforms in our system is to remove this handgun from the table. By then, there could be a presidential gathering, convention. It took America, I believe, 12 years to sign the... we are better, probably 12 months or 6 months, but not 12 days. So it's something should people, representative of the guys in open, every citizen can write the letters. They sit together and shape the ways to strengthen the independence of Supreme Court, to strengthen or protect the values of the Declaration of Independence, and to protect democracy, not how to destroy it, but how to improve it. That's the challenge, and I'm confident we will win.
Ehud, your thoughts on observations many have made, that yes, there are particular interests on the part of those in this government. Netanyahu has his, religious Zionists have theirs, the Haredi have theirs, etc. But is the vigor of the public protest, which you participated in, is the force and the continuity of that protest about more than just the threat of the consequences of these judicial changes? Is it the issue of secular, religious, burden sharing, the settlements, other major political, social issues that have not been addressed? Is it all wrapped up in this?
I think that the big elephants, as I mentioned them earlier, Palestinian issue, religion and state, and the huge gaps in opportunity should be put on the shelf for the time being. It's not that they're important, they're extremely important, but probably as important as the issue of democracy, but there is different on the timeline, the different urgency for them. They are with us for many years, and they might stay, I hope, for a short time, but probably more realistically for some time into the future. But this is a crucial issue. If Israel ceases to be democracy, we won't be able even to discuss any of these other subjects. So it doesn't make sense to demand that while we are dealing with making sure that Israel remains democracy, at the same time we put into it also the solution for the Palestinian issue and the issue of synagogue and state, and of course the big gap in it doesn't make sense. There should be certain logic. The inner logic is that we have to deal with this challenge first, to complete it and make sure that it's Israel. We might be waiting for we call it constitutional moment, where we will have an opportunity. It's really an opportunity to decide at most kind of constitution for Israel, at worst, at least a charter of rights of the individual, of any minority, and a basic law, well protected, heavily protected, named legislation. What are the rules of the game? There is difference between dealing with the content, what should be put into the system, and the rules of the game. Government has the right to open war. Government has the right to make peace. Government has the right to build infrastructure or to set any priorities. Government does not have a right to change the nature of the regime on its own because they are majority. And this idea is kind of contradicting, so I keep saying it is a legitimate government. No one suspects that there was a fraud in the election. Legitimate, not illegitimate, legal government, but blatantly illegitimate. I usually use Max Weber, to those of you who know, on charisma and the building of institutions, say even absolute monarch has an unseen domain of legitimacy vis-a-vis his subject, not even citizen. If he tries to break it, it ends up bad for him. Started with King Charles, not the present one, the original, and later on with this king whose lady saw that if they don't have bread, they could have brioche, some French cake. It ended very bad for her. So we are dealing with a government that acting totally illegitimate. In Hebrew slang we say there is a black flag hovering over this decision, which means that you have not the right to resist it, but the obligation to resist it. It is taken from military law under another kind of...
A different topic that I'd like you to be equally frank on. We heard our colleague, Salam Fayyad, talking about the situation with respect to the Palestinians, hopes for resolution, if not a comprehensive peace, some form of political horizon. So I ask you for your thoughts and on the specific question, in the absence of a resolution here, can Israel be a Jewish and democratic state in the future?
First of all, I have to express my opinion about Salam Fayyad. He is the best and the most serious Palestinian leader that I ever met, and I believe I met all of them in the last 50 years, or more than 50. So he's the most serious one. And he really did a lot. Only point that he's a more operational guy with both academic and practitioner, but he's not a politician. He probably, like many of us, hate politics if he can choose, but he found himself into it. About Palestinian issue, I prefer to put aside for a moment the Palestinian argument and talk about the Israeli interest. I think that following what Gili said earlier, between River Jordan and the Mediterranean, there live 15 million people, about half Jews and half non-Jews. If only one political entity named Israel reigning over this whole area, it will become inevitably, that's the key word, inevitably, either non-Jewish or non-democratic. Because if this bloc of millions of Palestinians can vote, that's a binational state overnight, and within a generation, let's say, a very short period, historically speaking, a binational state with Muslim majority. That was not, don't spread the word, that was not the Zionist dream. And the second alternative, only one, is that they cannot vote. If the blocks of millions of Palestinians cannot vote permanently, not temporarily, it's now only 56 years, but it's temporary. So once it becomes clear, and you can hear the coming ideas of how to make it permanent in the statement of some of our cabinet members within this unholy alliance. They're only telling us what should be the next. If they cannot vote permanently, that's not a democracy. I don't want to use a term from the neighboring continent to the south from the previous century. But it's not a democracy under whatever test. So that also is not the Zionist dream. Israel was established with a strong democratic spirit in spite of not having a constitution. It was Ben-Gurion who always said that Israeli kind of option to survive and flourish in this region has two bases, two pillars. One is our might, strategic and military and strategic might, including the support of the United States, QME, whatever, which was not existing yet. And the other is our being able to hold at any price to the moral high ground. He thought that because we are a small country, surrounded by quite of a hostile neighborhood, our only chance to operate in this complicated world is by holding to the moral high ground. It was both some of instinct, the right instinct for a Jewish state, and the right sober judgment of realities. I remember a conversation with one of the founders of the labor movement in Israel, decades ago. He told me, Ehud, if what we are going to accomplish here in Israel is just being another Paraguay, he said it wasn't worth neither the dreams nor the sacrifice that we made along the way. We are, suppose, if Jews coming back home after 2,000 years in order to establish a political entity where they failed twice in the past for reasons that you can find in the Talmud. If we make this rebellion against the diaspora under the Tsarist empire originally, and want to do it, it should be worth something more than Paraguay. I don't have anything against Paraguay, if there is some Paraguayans. That's just quoting this man who passed away long ago. But he takes it something mediocre that does it. So our vision is of really making Israel within the next generation a member of the cutting-edge societies in the world in terms of the education, science, culture, freedoms, the quality of life, and at the end, even standard of living. And a place which lives in peace with all its neighbors, including the Palestinians. I will come to the details of the plan in a moment. And where our own children and grandchildren will choose to live because they know they are Jews. They know that they can jump to every corner of the world and be successful. They will choose to stay, and young Jews all around the world will be proud of their affiliation with it. And that's nothing that you can take for granted. I was a generation and a half ago, I was a graduate student at Stanford, and every leading university, there was a cell, active cell, usually around Hillel, fighting, made of Israeli, former Israelis and Gentiles and whatever, fighting for the cause of Israel. I recently visited some universities, and I found guys like those who interrupted here. The Barak, the murderer, and whatever, and in every leading university you find a cell of Palestinians, Arabs, Gentiles, some Israelis and former Israelis or Jews which are supporting the Palestinian cause. And we are losing, to tell the truth, we are losing our touch and inspiration with the young generation. I have an American friend of well-to-do family. When the mother told me, she knew that my alma mater is Stanford. She told me I sent my eldest daughter to Stanford. She came to the first Thanksgiving after starting studying, and told me, "Mom, I'm only a few weeks here, and I know that you lied to me all my life about Israel. Now I know the truth." That's from 6 weeks or whatever in Stanford. And that's quite frightening. And we have to take care. So come back to this issue of moral high ground. We have to be able, first of all, we have never to lose sight, because we have compelling imperative to find a two-state solution, not because of justice for the Palestinians, which is worth its own weight, but because of our own interests, our own future, our own security, and our own fate. We have to care about ourselves. We don't have any chance of being or completing the Zionist vision if we cannot stick to this two-state solution. And so, first of all, we should never lose sight with this objective. It doesn't mean that we sail straightly. Whoever of you sailed knows that if you sail against headwinds, you cannot go directly. You have to zigzag. But if you don't lose sight of where you want to go, you go. There is a Greek saying, if you don't know which port you want to reach, no wind will take you there. We have to be kind of logic. So the practical meaning is of two prongs. Number one, we should, as Gilish said, not make any step that close the option upon this possibility. And many of the activities of the messianic, lunatic part of our government is aimed exactly at this purpose, to close any possibility, looking forward, close any possibility of ending up with two states. So we have to make sure that this doesn't happen. Secondly, I believe that the Israeli government should make a clear statement that our vision is two-state solution. We are ready to delineate a line within the Holy Land within which we'll have a Jewish majority for generations to come, and 80 or 85% of the settlements over few percent of the area of Judea and Samaria, and leave the rest of it for independent, viable Palestinian, probably disarmed, how we call it, demilitarized, but independent, viable Palestinian state. This should be our objective. If we announce it, it will answer Salam's question, how about recognizing our right to be a state, to be recognized as a legitimate state. You know, we recently always, it's a kind of very popular kind of slogan in Israel, we need the Palestinian, all the streams within the Palestine, all the factions to recognize our Israel as a Jewish state. I made it accurate, Gili?
Yep.
Yeah, to recognize. And I wonder, why the hell we didn't demand it from the Egyptians? No answer. Why the hell we didn't ask it from the Jordanians when we make a peace with them? We didn't ask him even from Assad. When Rabin made negotiation, when Bibi made negotiation with Assad, he never demanded that he will recognize the Jewish nature of our state. Never. So why now? It always raises suspicions only in order to extract something that they can never answer positively, and probably it will help to slow the process. It has nothing to do with us. The whole Zionism emerged as a rebellion against this idea that we need someone else to define ourselves. Why the hell we need them? We define ourselves by our actions, our deeds, and our willpower. And we, of course, we will be happy if everyone will applaud us, but we do not demand it from anyone, because demanding it, you put a question mark about the legitimacy of your own sovereignty. So basically, we should be capable of doing this step, and we should be capable to do it for opportunities. Now, Gili described incremental kind of process, and Salam remarked, I have the following observation. We all are acquainted with the triangle of what shapes history. Is it the leader, the people, or the circumstances? So it's a gestalt, it's all of them together. But certain point, when we look at the realities of this moment, especially when we are dealt with the democracy crisis, but even afterwards, in next April or May. I hope by then it will be behind us. So we look at it, we might still have to admit that, we have the PA, we have the Hamas there, which are bad guys. They are good allies. Sometimes they perceive by some Israelis as a good ally because they are murderers. No one can seriously demand from us to compromise with them, so it's much better than the Palestinian Authority. And some Israelis think that we have to strengthen, without announcing it, the Hamas, and weaken the Palestinian Authority. But it's the opposite. So we have interest in taking care of dealing with this in a proper way and give them the opportunity to overcome. So they are not yet together. I think that a moment will come where the combination of situation and leadership will enable a shortcut. That's the right way. Usually under crisis or immediately after a crisis, both sides realize that the time had come. At that time, the public will be much less important. I want just to give you an example from the past. Remember Begin-Sadat peace. Begin went to Camp David, first Camp David, not mine with Clinton. He came a year after Sadat visited Israel, and at least pro forma, all the psychological barriers had been kind of evaporated. Sadat visited, sat with Golda Meir and everyone. And there were a lot of conversations around this year. But 3 weeks before Begin went to Camp David, 2/3 of the Israel, probably 70% of the Israeli public said, even for full peace, we cannot give the whole Sinai. We need, it's a strategic need of Israel to have this strip from El Arish to Sharm el-Sheikh. Begin went there. He didn't sign a peace agreement, only a framework agreement, only in initials. Should be kind of how it's called, call it to be approved, ratified by the two parliaments. But within those weeks until the ratification, there were polls. 70% of the public supported the great breakthrough. What it tells you? It tells you that in the right moment, when there is leadership, with visionary leadership on both sides, and probably Sadat was even the most kind of tenacious kind of visionary in this case, the public accepts it. And I know from personal experience something on the other side of the of Begin adventure, kind of the war in '82. And 18 years later, I became prime minister. I decided no logic, no reason whatsoever to be there. Everyone was against it. Politics, including my party, some of the coalition, the opposition, and the armed forces, everyone. And I was sure that if I will stick to it, and I will give the order at the right moment, whether they like it or not, it will happen, and then it becomes irreversible. So I don't expect something exactly. The history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, as Mark Twain said. So it's there will come. When we ended Camp David, I told our people, whether it take 5, 15, it's already more than 20, or 50 years, a moment will come when there will be an agreement. We will need by then a magnifying glass to see what's the difference between what was already on the table at Camp David, what had been agreed. I told Arafat more than once, remember, it would not be decided in heaven. It's up to us to agree to it. Your toughest moment will be looking at the eyes of your own people, not mine, and make the compromises. And my toughest moment will be looking to my people. But it's about human beings to decide. If we can do it, it will go to our successors, and nothing will be changed. Every Jabal and Wadi, to those of you who know Arabic, will remain the same. The only thing that will change will be the size of the graveyards. And I told him, unfortunately, your graveyard will go much faster than ours, I promise you. So I told him, there will be an agreement. The moment there will be, within few years, people could not explain to themselves why the hell it took so long, and why the hell we had to bury so many people along the way, and on both sides. And I think that that's the right way to approach it. You cannot control everything. I cannot promise you nothing for next quarter or next year, but as long as we stick and translate it into actions on the ground. If you have this, yes, probably you have to zigzag, but you are heading there, and you are ready to make all potential commitments and block attempts to torpedo it, because if you are sober enough, there are no secrets. You see what really happens around you, and do it. It's all about leadership and the unpredictable nature of history. You cannot predict when exactly the opportunity will occur.
Ehud, thank you very much. Extraordinary presentation. Kol hakavod.